Good morning. Today is May 7th, 2020. This is the duly called meeting of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission. We are obviously having our meeting by alternate remote means today. This is based on Governor Abbott's March 13th, 2020 proclamation of a state disaster affecting all counties in Texas due to the coronavirus, and the governor's March 16th, 2020 suspension of certain provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act. This meeting will be held by video conference call as authorized by the Government Code Section 551.127. I am Brandon Hurley. I am the chairman of the commission. Members of the public have access to this meeting. However, they will be muted unless they raise their hand and are called upon. So there's a function on the Zoom platform that allows you to raise your hand. If you have any problems with that, you can either email the admin address of our commission, or I suppose that's the only way you can get in contact with us during this. So I guess the other function would be that I believe there is a chat possibility. However, I would ask that commissioners not use the chat function during today, because obviously that becomes a public record. And if we need to go into executive session for any reason, we will be doing so by a different platform that was sent to you earlier by Andrew. While I'm on the topic, I want to thank Andrew, because without him, we definitely would not be having a meeting today. He has set up all of this. He has luckily made it as simple as possible for everyone, which is difficult considering this group. So we appreciate Andrew's efforts, and we appreciate everyone who has joined us via Zoom today. Quickly, I will note that every commissioner is here. Commissioner Morris, Vice Chairman Salzman, Commissioner Edwards, Judge Dolgener, Commissioner Mundy, Commissioner Bradford, and Commissioner Saudick. So we have a quorum and we can proceed with our agenda. Also, I will note for the public that the agenda is available on our website, www.TLLRWDCC.org. Other documents we'll be using today, commissioners, we have sent out to you via email. If for some reason you need them, please let us know. We can email those to you again, and I will be referring to them throughout the meeting. Although I believe we can see all the attendees, commissioners, if you click on the attendees button to the right, you can see who all is here. I will note that we have a few elected and appointed officials with us today. Commissioner Bobby Janeka, which we appreciate his attendance. As always, all of our friends from TCEQ, which we appreciate attending. We have a few other people that have joined us. Is anyone here today, if you would raise your hand, is anyone here today from a press organization? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Are there any other elected officials or representatives of elected officials that I have missed?
Chairman Hurley, there is one raised hand.
Yes. Okay, I'm making sure I see who that is. Chris Schneidmiller. So Andrew, how do I activate Chris's ability to speak?
One sec, let me just make you the host. Okay, you are the host. Go ahead.
Okay. Chris, can you tell us who you are here representing? Oh, hold on, let me unmute you. Chris, can you tell us who you're here representing?
Yeah, I'm just representing the Exchange Monitor publications as a member of the press. For the most part, I'll just be listening, so feel free to mute me. But did want to let you know I'm here.
Thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate the Exchange Monitor being here today. Any other members of the press that have joined us here today? And no other public officials or representatives?
Brandon, I told you yesterday. Yeah, Brandon, I told you yesterday the judge might be here. He's not right this second, so he thought the meeting was at 10. I told him at 10, but so he might be later showing up.
When he comes in, please let us know. We'll welcome him. As has already been evident, we appreciate your patience today as we bumble through this Zoom process. It may take a few joint efforts to get everything done, but we appreciate everybody's willingness to attend via this manner. So we have a quorum. We can proceed with our business for today. That will start with item number 4 on our agenda, which is a public comment period. Usually we require people to fill out a comment card to register. However, today, because of the unique way we are meeting, I just wanted to open up the floor to see if anyone had a public comment of a general nature they would like to make before the commission before we proceed to the rest of our agenda. So again, if you will hit the raise hand function on the Zoom application, we will notice you and let you speak. All right, seeing no hands being raised, we'll move on then to our next agenda item, which is item number 5, which is a consideration and possible action on applications for the importation of low-level waste. We only have one today. It is the import application of Thomas Gray and Associates. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Chairman Salzman, who is the head of our technical committee. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Thomas Gray and Associates Incorporated, doing business as Environmental Management and Controls Incorporated. That application or import application was received March 30, 2020. It's number 1-0250-00. In this case, Thomas Gray is a broker who is a licensed waste processor and collector requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have specifically requested authorization to dispose of Class A, Class B, and Class C stable and unstable discrete items, macro-encapsulated, stabilized in concrete, or sealed sources, macro-encapsulated, stabilized in concrete, depleted uranium, and low-level radioactive waste. And those waste streams were approved by TCEQ in letter correspondence dated April 23, 2020. They have requested a proposed volume of 2,000 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 1,000 curies. They have requested to be able to dispose of waste from the states of Alabama, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And I would note that any waste that originates from the Southwestern or Rocky Mountain compacts, which the list of states did include the states from both of those compacts, would require export authorization. To date, the applicant has not provided generator authorizations or export authorizations, so those would be needed for before any shipments could be made. They have requested an agreement that would actually begin September 1 of 2020 through August 31 of 2021. So this is for the next fiscal year and disposal year. The applicant requested or indicated that the waste was from small quantity generators, but based on the volume and curies, the technical committee would disagree with that this is small quantity, and so we would not treat it that way. Other than that, the technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And I'm sorry, Commissioners, I should have told you that was tab 9 in your electronic notebook. Are there any questions of the technical committee on the import application of Thomas Gray and Associates? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
All right, I make a motion that we approve the import application from Thomas Gray and Associates, doing business environmental management and controls. That's number 1-025-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is stable and unstable. Waste description is discrete items, including sealed sources, macroencapsulated, stabilized in concrete, depleted uranium, and low-level radioactive waste. The volume is 2,000 cubic feet. The radioactivity is 1,000 curies. I'm not going to reread the list of states, but it does include waste from the Southwestern and Rocky Mountain compacts. And so they would need to provide information to the commission with regard to generator authorizations and export authorizations, and no more than, I think we've allowed up to 6 submittals for shipments. And this agreement would be for a period of September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of Thomas Gray and Associates in item 5A? Hearing none. Is there any public comment? Which again, if you'd like to make a public comment, please hit the raise hand function on your Zoom. Seeing none, I think we can move on to a vote. We will try this via voice vote and see if it works, but all in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Thomas Gray and Associates, represented by item 5A on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. Dave Gordon, let me ask you real quick, are voice votes still okay via Zoom?
Yeah, as long as we can all hear each other, voice vote should be good. Judge Delchner, just make sure you unmute yourself for your aye vote, but I think we've got everybody here.
How about now?
Much better.
You're good.
Okay, I had it backwards.
No problem.
Mr. Chair, the
Not the
judges,
first or last time.
Brandon,
Yes.
the judges came in, so I just want to introduce them.
Hi, Judge. Thank you for attending today.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you giving us some of your time.
Yes.
With that, we can move on to item 6A on our agenda, which is the amendments to our import agreements. The first one is item 6A, which is the import amendment request of Permafix. And I will turn it back over to our Vice Chairman and Technical Committee Chair. Again, this is tab 10 on your electronic notebook.
Mr. Chairman, the technical committee has received and reviewed an amendment request from Permafix Northwest Richland Incorporated. That was received March 2nd, 2020. It's number 1-0221-01. In this case, Permafix has requested an increase to the disposal volume to 515 cubic feet. They've also, they have not requested any other changes in specifically that the curies would remain the same. And they've indicated that the reason for the increase in volume is the treatment that they're doing to the waste to make it acceptable for disposal. So that would make sense that the curies don't go up, but the volume would, because they're having to add reagents and absorbents into the material. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
This may be a good time to remind everyone, our amendment process is obviously a lot simpler than our initial application process. We allow them to simply do it by letter. This may be a question for Andrew and John, but we've never developed a form for the amendment simply because the amendments take a million different paths. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And so we allow people to simply describe in a letter what they want in the way of an amendment. what level of specificity do we usually require?
Well, obviously, we need to understand if there are any waste changes to the waste stream, the waste form, or the waste class. We need to understand any changes to the volume or the curies. And then what we typically want to understand is, so, what's the reason behind the change? And for example, in this one, they're doing some treatment of the waste, so it's increasing the volume. So we typically request they provide an explanation for the reason for the change. Sometimes it can be as simple as, they want a date change because they couldn't make the shipment because they couldn't get a cask or something like that. But we typically want to understand the reason why. Andrew, I mean, that's my best recollection. Is there anything else?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, John, is typically we will get a request for an amendment and then have to have enough information to determine whether or not it's a major amendment or a minor amendment. And that covers all the things that you just talked about. In this case, it's an increase in volume or curies. So it would be a major amendment requiring full commission vote.
And if it's a minor amendment, it can be approved by less than the full commission, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that, because sometimes as you're going through the documents, all you see is a letter and everything else comes on a very specific form. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. Any other questions of the technical committee on the import amendment application of Permafix?
Do we just add this letter to their form in terms of our files, or do we actually go back and amend their application approval form?
We draft a specific amendment document that does have a standardized form that indicates what section of their agreement is changing and what it's changing to, and that's signed by the chair.
Very good.
Any other questions of the technical committee? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the amendment request from Permafix Northwest Richland. That's number 1-0221-01. And the amendment would increase the volume from 150 cubic feet to 515 cubic feet due to treatment of the waste and addition of reagents and absorbents. No other changes to the import agreement.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Judge. And there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import agreement amendment request from Permafix represented in item 6A on our agenda? Any public comment on the Permafix amendment request? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a vote. All in favor of approving the Permafix amendment request represented by 6A, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 6B, which is the import agreement amendment request from TVA Browns Ferry. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the technical committee has received and reviewed amendment request from Tennessee Valley Authority. It was dated March 31, 2020. It's number 1-0225-01. In this case, TVA has requested an increase in volume from 5,000 cubic feet to 12,500 cubic feet. And the reason is they want to also ship Class A condensate resin, which was previously being shipped to another facility. So this constitutes both a change in volume and a change in the waste stream. I would note that the change in waste stream was authorized for disposal by TCEQ and letter correspondence dated April 23, 2020. And they are not requesting any other changes other than the volume and the waste stream. And the technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions on the import agreement amendment request from TVA represented by item 6B in our agenda? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the amendment request from Tennessee Valley Authority, it's number 1-0225-01. And the amendment would increase the volume from 5,000 cubic feet to 12,500 cubic feet and would add a Class A waste, Class A condensate resin to approve the approved waste stream.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on item 6B? Actually, John, I had a question. So this does not change their requested curies, even though it has such a high volume increase?
Yeah, condensate resins usually have a very low activity level. So I got to look at the form, but if it was the original curies are high enough, it might be actually too small to see a difference.
Their letter specifically only requested a change in the volume. The original import request asked for 5,000 cubic feet and 3,000 curies. So Commissioner Edwards is likely correct. The condensate resin is usually pretty low in activity, and the 3,000 curies, there may have been enough, perhaps some overestimation, so they feel they can cover it.
Okay. Any other questions of the technical committee before we move on to a vote? Any public comment on item 6B? Seeing no raised hands, we can move on to a vote then. All in favor of the approval of the import agreement amendment request of TVA Browns Ferry represented by item 6B on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 7 in our agenda, which is the consideration and possible action on requests for the exportation of waste. Commissioners, this is item, tab 12 on your electronic notebook. Just a quick reset of what we do with exports. It is does not follow the exact same premise as the import applications. However, we do require that anyone who is a generator of low-level waste who wants to export it and not send it to the WCS facility in Andrews get our approval and authorization. So this is the process for that. It is, again, generally a little bit simpler than our import process, but and the obviously because it is not being imported, our technical committee doesn't do the same workup that it does with imports and requests for amendment to import agreements. So there is no technical committee report on this. However, therefore, to give John a break, I will just simply describe it as this is an export request from Bionomics, who is a regular generator that we have. The volume that is asking to be exported is 2 cubic feet. The radioactivity is 0.002 curies. It is Class A waste that they intend to take to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek Incineration Facility. And this would be done, it simply says in the year 2020, but I'm assuming it would be done in this disposal year, which ends August 31st, 2020. If I'm wrong about that, John, do you know?
I do not, Brandon. I'm looking at the same information that you are.
So obviously we would have to confirm, because we do request that the exporters report back when the waste is actually exported and in what volumes to track to make sure they haven't exceeded the authorization of what we give them. So we would have to go back to Bionomics and make sure we know when that waste is going to actually be exported. And again, if I say something incorrect, John, correct me, but generally WCS does not have the ability to incinerate waste at the Andrews County facility, and therefore this has been one of the common bases for exporting waste, is when they need to go have waste incinerated. Is that accurate?
That's correct. WCS does not perform any incineration of waste on site. And since this is biological waste, incineration is really the preferred method for treating that waste. And then there's a very small amount of ash. I would note that the actual generator of the waste is Peloton Therapeutics. And Bionomics is just acting on their behalf to submit this export request.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. So with that being said, is there any questions about the export request? All right, then I will entertain a motion.
Someone raising their hand?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Bobby?
Commissioner Janeka. Let me.
Hi there. Can y'all hear me?
Yes. Thank
I just
you.
wanted to pass on secondhand information. I don't think John McCormick is participating in this particular meeting watching it, but I did just check with him, and he clarified that he would like to request through December 2020 if possible.
From a reporting standpoint, John, what does that do to us since we like to have these numbers per our disposal year?
I think for an export, it's probably not necessary to require it to end at what we consider our normal fiscal year. He would just make the report for this fiscal year, whether he did or did not, and likely based on that request, he would report he did not make that export, and that, quote, next year he would then report that they made that export. I don't see it as a problem as sort of approving it in advance.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Janeka.
Thank you.
All right, with that clarification, any other questions that have arisen about this export request? All right, then I will entertain a motion. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the export authorization request of Bionomics represented in item 7 of our agenda?
So move.
I'll make a motion that we, I'm sorry?
Go ahead, John.
I think,
I'll make a motion we approve the export request for Peloton Therapeutics via Bionomics. The volume is 2 cubic feet. The radioactivity is 0.0 curies. It's Class A waste, and it'll be exported to Energy Solutions Bear Creek incineration facility.
there's a motion. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the request for the export authorization of Bionomics on behalf of Peloton Therapeutics? Any public comment on the export request? Hearing none, we will move on to a vote then. All in favor of the motion to approve the export authorization request from Bionomics on behalf of Peloton Therapeutics, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. Okay. That gets us through our import-export portion of our agenda. The next item on our agenda is item number 8, which is reports from Dave Carlson at Waste Control Specialists. And with that, I'll see if Dave is on the attendee list.
Says always gets recorded.
I don't see Dave on here.
Yeah, if he's on there, his hand is up.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
They'll be able to do this after the meeting, I think.
Yeah.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you very much. So let me give just a brief report. First off, the WCS site continues in full operation. We have had no coronavirus disruption, and so we are operating on a normal basis. Based on Homeland Security guidance, we're considered essential and will continue to operate during the current health situation. Secondly, my report for the fiscal year, the current fiscal year, starting September 1st, 2019, in compact, we've disposed of 10,165 cubic feet and 559 curies. Out of compact, we've disposed of 17,741 cubic feet and 3,613 curies of low-level radioactive waste. Cumulative disposal through April 2020, that's from inception through today, is just over 177,000 cubic feet, which is just under 2% of total license capacity of the site, and just over 475,000 curies decayed, which is about 12% of the licensed capacity of the site. In terms of quarterly payments, we made our last quarterly payment in March to both TCQ and to Andrews County. The payment to TCQ is $1,024,843. Andrews County was $204,902. That leads to a total surcharge payment since inception of just over $69 million over the past 7 years. Beyond that, just one thing I want to bring to your attention, Chairman Hurley, is back on March 6, 2020, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission issued a proposed interpretive rulemaking on very low-level waste. For anybody that wants to see that, you can locate it at 85 FR 13076. The comments on that rule are due July 20th. And I just want to point that out because that would certainly have the potential for a significant impact on existing 10 CFR 61 facilities, in that it would allow for disposal of very low-level radioactive waste, which is not actually defined in the rulemaking, but it would allow for that disposal in municipal solid waste landfills. That's again, that's not hazardous waste landfills. It would be allowed in hazardous waste landfills, but also in municipal solid waste landfills, such as the landfills that most of us have in or adjacent to our communities. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Dave. I'm sure people will have questions. Are there any questions of Mr. Carlson?
I'm
sorry.
We'll start with Commissioner Sodick, and then we'll go to the judge.
Okay.
I'm just wondering whether there are comparisons to a previous year or any month-to-month comparison, so that we can tell whether there's the extent of a change over time.
So I have not brought that with me, Commissioner. I think our volumes and so on are relatively consistent for this time of the year. I think we're seeing Vermont Yankee is contributing to that as we continue to make progress in the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee.
Dave, can you give us a quick update on where Yankee is in their decommissioning?
I can't. I'm sorry. I thought you said Dick. Yeah, Dave.
Either one, actually. That's fine.
I can't.
So while I don't speak for that facility, they certainly ship waste to us, and I can tell you the status up there is they are continuing to work regardless of coronavirus. They're considered essential activity in the state of Vermont, and so they continue to make, my understanding, good progress in terms of decommissioning, and we continue to see waste coming from that facility on a regular basis.
Dave, is that waste, have they cut up the reactor vessel or removed the vessel internals yet?
My understanding is that that is still in progress. However, we've seen reactor vessel related waste. So, they're starting at the top and moving down, and we've seen certainly some of the reactor vessel waste from the head and so on.
And Dave, have they provided you a schedule on when they expect various milestones to occur on the disposal side?
They do. They provide detailed schedules to us, and we're a integrated team member with them in terms of being on site and working with them on the planning and scheduling of waste disposal. So we're privy to their waste disposal schedules. Absolutely.
And do we have kind of a all-in date when they expect to be complete with their disposal efforts?
Yeah, I'd rather let them speak to that. But based on guidelines that they provided previously, we're still on track with all of that. I think our last, direct briefing by them was last time we were up in Vermont. We had a good briefing as to what the complete schedule looked like.
Okay, so nothing's changed as far as you know from that briefing that I think we received as well?
No, nothing's changed from that. That's still current information.
Anyone else have questions for Mr. Carlson?
Yeah, I just had one. David, how much has TCQ received over the long haul of this? I didn't get that. I just want the judge to know.
Yeah, TCQ's received $56,411,000, and Andrews County has received $12,810,000.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up while he was here. Thank you.
Dave, I had one question. Is there a protocol in place if for some reason the coronavirus hit Andrews County? What would be the protocol if you had a large number of your employees that contracted?
Yeah, we've looked through that, and our most immediate concern would be continued security of the site, continued environmental monitoring, and so we have plans in place to make sure that we would have continuity of security, continuity of environmental monitoring. But even today, what we have done at the site is we practice social distancing, so we don't have people within 6 feet of each other, or when they are within 6 feet of each other, they're actually wearing respirators. And these are more than cloth devices you might see. These are actual HEPA filtered respirator devices, so that we don't have the potential to contaminate each other if somebody did have the coronavirus. We've also sent home the office workers, so our office workers at the site are working from home in general, and it's really just the operational workers that remain on the site. But if there was a significant outbreak in Andrews, which there hasn't been, but if there was a significant outbreak, we'd be most focused on security of the site and environmental monitoring, and we have plans in place to handle that.
Lisa, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yes. Dave, do you have a sense of how utilities might respond to the municipality option for disposal of very low level waste? I know that I've heard some expression of concern that even if that option existed, there's a significant liability that would go with shipping it to that type of facility versus a RCRA subpart C facility. Have you heard any similar stories?
I don't. We're trying to get the best information we can from the Nuclear Energy Institute, but I'm not even sure what their situation is on this right now. I know on the previous very low waste situation, they have some sort of legal action in process due to concerns about how the process was done. I'm not sure where they stand on this.
There are public reports from EPRI that support disposal of very low level waste and RCRA subpart C facilities. And it is specific to that type. There is a comparison done between the disposal requirements imposed upon that kind of waste outside of the United States and the RCRA subpart C. And the subpart C, of course, compares favorably with the international requirements that are imposed, but it does not extend to municipality type disposal options. That
Right,
may
and-
have some bearing.
In my concern, Commissioners, the way that they have defined very little waste is they have not defined by concentration of radionuclides or by type of radionuclides. They've defined very low level waste as 25 millirem cumulative annual dose to the most exposed person. So 25 millirem is a dose standard rather than a concentration standard. By way of comparison, based on current inventory that exists in the low-level radioactive waste facility in Andrews County, our peak dose or our maximum annual dose to anyone would be 0.5 millirem, and that 0.5 millirem occurs 170,000 years from now. It's significantly less today. So this 25 millirem that would be allowed is a much more significant number. In our record facility, for example, we're limited to 1 millirem, which is really not a problem for us either. 25 millirem, although that may be a decommissioning number in some places, is a number that would potentially allow 90% or more of the radioactive waste in the country to go to those facilities.
That's an interesting number that they picked. There's a comparison in those same reports of the dose limits that are used. Some countries use dose, some use activity limits, but I'm stretching my memory here, but it seems like Spain may go as high as 25 millirem, but the whole gambit is there across the globe, from just a few millirem as a limit up to I think there's one that's 10, one that's 15, and one that's 25. So that's interesting that they pick the top of the commonly used limits.
Dave, is there any distinction between it going towards a municipal publicly owned landfill versus privately operated ones?
That is not mentioned in the documents that I've read. So it wasn't in the Federal Register notice. There's no difference defined between whether it's a hazardous waste landfill or a municipal solid waste landfill or publicly or privately owned.
Okay, thanks.
So a municipality would have to be willing to do a performance assessment to determine what the waste acceptance criteria would be for low activity waste, since it isn't predefined based upon activity limits, it's based upon dose. So they would actually have to hire someone to say, if I take this kind of waste, it will be less than the dose limit that's imposed upon this facility. That seems like a pretty big hurdle for a municipality.
Well, Commissioner, I would submit that, perhaps running a ResRad calculation as opposed to the GoldSim kind of modeling that we would do at a 10 CFR 61 facility, I would submit that a ResRad calculation could be fairly straightforward.
They could certainly hire someone to do it. That's true.
Right.
And Commissioner, so you know, we are going to have this discussion later on in the agenda as well, because it is my intent to have a committee formed to actually put together a comment letter in response to this NRC request for comment. So I'm happy to have that discussion now, but it's also later on in the agenda, and I think some of these issues are appropriate for that portion of the agenda as well.
Okay.
Any other questions of Mr. Carlson? Yes, sir, Dick.
I'm still interested in context here. I would assume that since I guess there are 3 plants, 2 in Texas and 1 in Vermont, that would send you waste. It seems to me that when one of them is decommissioning, it should be expected that the amount that you get would go up substantially. Can you put it in context any? I mean, we've got these numbers as of the period that they're measured, but have you had much activity at the site, and much more much more shipping to us.
Commissioner Sadek, if you'd allow me, I'd be glad to put something together for the next Compact Commission meeting to draw those kind of comparisons and to show historically what we received in Compact as a trend, and then both in cubic feet and in curies. So I'd be glad to prepare that for the next session. I'd be only generalizing to give you much of an answer right now.
Come on, give it a try.
Can I comment on this for
Sure.
just a moment, Dave?
Yes, please.
So Dave will have to provide you the exact numbers, but just a little context. When a plant decommissions, there's a whole database of the typical volumes that have been generated by plants through decommissioning. There's some granularity to it in terms of what types of waste streams are generated, whether it's class A, B, or C. And we find it's all over the board. Small single units to large units have very differing volumes, and it isn't necessarily that the smallest units have the smallest volume. It depends upon what the projection is for the use of the land after the decommissioning complete, and that determines what the greenfield requirements are. It depends upon what kind of restrictions the state imposes that may exceed federal requirements, and how much actual contamination of land has occurred that is requiring any kind of excavation. So from a general standpoint, it's hard to take any plant and just look at their volumes and say they should be this percentage done. But the vast majority of the waste would probably go in the low activity waste cell, and 20% or so in the compact cell. Just for some context.
Well, I've always felt that one of our main concerns must be the economic health of the facility, and therefore, I would hope that when it starts taking waste from a decommissioned plant, it would begin to perk up a good deal. But I don't know exactly how you can measure that without some guidance from the plant.
And so, Dick, are you saying you would expect the volumes to increase during this time at the compact waste facility because of decommissioning of Yankee?
I don't know. There are experts on this panel that know a lot more than I do about that kind of thing, but I don't know why not. I mean, I would think that when they're straight piping stuff from one of these plants that is being dismantled, I would think it would increase their overall volume. It would add to the imports that they've mainly depended upon.
So there is a significant increase in volume during the decommissioning period in a comparison to an operational unit. A large amount of that waste is quite low in activity. It's rubble, dirt excavation, things from building demolition, and but once they get inside the facility to cut pieces and components out of the reactor building and around the reactor vessels, spent fuel pool and things, there's higher activity components there that will likely go into the compact cell. But there's not a lot of effort put into reducing the activity level in the United States, or really segregating out non-contaminated from contaminated, which is done quite frequently in other countries. But here, pretty much when they do the demolition, unless it's very, very clear there's no contamination, it all will ship for disposal. But a whole lot of that, like 80%, is expected to be in that low activity or very low level waste category.
Which would go to the RECRA cell and not to the compact waste facility.
That's what I would expect. But there's still increased volumes from vessel internals and that kind of thing in the Class B and C waste category.
Right. So if I can generalize, Commissioner Sadick, yes, we're absolutely seeing increases in compact volumes due to the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. And certainly we are seeing increases in our exempt facility or low activity waste facility due to the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. As expected, we're seeing dirt, we're seeing rubble, we're seeing all kinds of things come out of that facility, go to the low activity waste facility. And as Commissioner Edwards alluded to earlier, as the cutting up and removal of reactor related items happen, that goes into the compact waste facility, and we're seeing some of that as well. And I'll get you volumes for a future meeting.
And Dick, is your question really, is it moving the financial needle?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of our problems, it seems to me. We go along and we look at snapshots of disposal in curies and in volume. And we get some kind of reports about what's going on with the RECRA facility as well. But and then all of a sudden, you know, as we were a year ago or whatever, we're faced with the company saying, well, now we have to go bankrupt and we have to get bailed out by somebody else. And I guess I realize that getting into a lot of the financial stuff is a kind of a no-no for our commission, but I think that we ought to have a clearer idea of how whether the site is now in a more stable situation, due in part to the in-compact activities. That's all. And I guess if everybody else is satisfied on that point or doesn't think it's relevant, then I'm happy to move on. But
a couple of things. One, the capacity report that Brandon distributed yesterday has some of these numbers. No, I mean, you can look at the volumes and the curies over reporting periods. The last 9 months seem to show pretty high volumes, pretty low curies compared to the previous years. There's no way of knowing whether that's Vermont Yankee driven, but that does seem consistent with the scenario that Lisa described. But I wouldn't know how to go about translating that into sort of financial terms, even if I knew more than I know about the rates, because decommissioning is such a good news, bad news proposition for the facilities. A lot of waste in the short term, but then no waste because the facility isn't operating anymore. So the total waste from any given plant, if it closes down early, is less obviously than it would be if it operated longer and then decommissioned. But since the ones who aren't decommissioning also in many cases aren't shipping, that's another variable that one would have to know a lot more than we know in order to take it into account financially.
And commissioners, to Peter's point, I included some of those reports in the packet, but then there were some that I received after I sent out the packet. And so you got a second email that had some of those numbers in it as well. But I agree that I think those reports clearly show the volumes.
Yeah, it's the second email that I was referring to that does show the trends over time.
And I guess the ultimate question is, from a financial modeling standpoint, Dave, are you receiving the financial benefits you expected to receive from the Vermont Yankee decommissioning? Or is that to be seen still?
Certainly, we're seeing financial benefit from it. Because it's an in-compact facility, they dispose of waste at much lower rates than outside the compact facilities would, but that's to be expected. So it's on track with what we've expected.
Dick, any other questions?
No, I would appreciate a little more on the one that I asked at the next meeting.
Absolutely.
I don't understand how we can get a clear picture unless we understand the low activity waste cell as well as the compact cell. The two are very interconnected. They're both receiving large volumes of waste that, there has to be a decision made whether it goes in the compact cell or the low activity cell. If we didn't have the low activity cell, it would go into the compact cell. So, if you look at shipments from VY, to get a whole picture, it isn't just what's being shipped to the compact facility and disposed there. It's also waste that's coming into the low activity waste cell. That's where the whole picture is.
And we do get a sense of those numbers as a result of our management rule that reports the importation of low-level waste that does not end up in the compact waste facility. So it may take some work to compare what we receive in those reports compared with what we know goes into the compact waste facility. And this may be a question for Linda. I can't remember, do the reports break down the source of the waste and the reports we get from WCS? Is the actual generator listed, or is it just raw volume numbers?
Well, initially we did see we saw some generator. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the initial reports did listed by generator. So generator, volume, curies, all the normal information we request. John, you want to add to that?
No, I believe you're correct, Linda.
I guess when I think about the whole thing, the compact facility, in a way,
It's 11 hours.
we think the low activity waste cells are very good development, actually quite brilliant business strategy. And it allows for disposal of lower activity waste at much more reasonable and competitive costs relative to what else is available to generators in the industry. And by using that cell, it also conserves the disposal space that is available in the compact facility for waste that really needs that kind of isolation. So that part is all great. But in a sense, waste that's going into the low activity waste cell, it makes the LAW cell sort of a competitor to the compact cell when we're trying to look at the whole financial picture. Waste, we would have to either be approved for export to go to a lower cost option outside of the state, or if it didn't get approved for export, it would have to go into the compact cell if in fact the low activity waste cell did not exist at WCS. I'm not sure if you're following what I'm saying, but it's a good thing the low activity waste cell is there. And it's part of, I think, the overall financial viability of WCS, which is sort of inextricably connected when we try to look at the compact facility itself. That's my opinion.
And Lisa, is what you're saying that it basically the RECRA cell cuts both ways. It provides a wonderful option for very low level waste, but it also obviously, especially on an in-compact basis, takes away waste that would otherwise be going into the compact waste facility at what would presumably be a higher rate.
Yes.
And there's obviously the individual generators in compact, I'm sure, appreciate the idea that the RECRA cell is available simply because of the cost savings. So I'm sure they like it, but the downside of all, and so it's good in a general sense, but the downside is that ultimately what that means is it presumably generates less revenue and therefore maybe doesn't support the compact waste facility as much as it otherwise could.
Yeah, I mean, I presume we would approve exports if our in-compact generators had a significantly lower cost disposal option to them, which they probably would if the low activity waste cell did not exist in Texas, but we wouldn't have to. And I think the only reason I really bring it up is we keep dancing around trying to understand how we best protect the financial viability in our role of the site. And it's hard to sort of have a clear understanding of the financial picture because the site is operated as a total site, at least as far as I can tell. So there's overhead and administrative costs that cover the federal cells, the low activity waste cell, and the compact cell. So how someone divides it out and we can speak coherently and provide a good set of recommendations to our legislators on what actions should be taken that are in the interest of the state. It's hard to do that without a clear picture, and in particular the low activity waste cell and the compact cell I think are very closely linked.
And Chairman, if I could for a second, I would make a case that there really is no competition between the low activity waste cell and the compact cell. And in fact, this commission previously approved Class A waste that would go to the compact waste facility even today for export simply on the basis of pricing because we were unable to lower our prices due to rulemaking to a level that was competitive. And so export was approved for that containerized Class A waste simply because of the restrictions that we had on pricing. If I go to the majority of our waste, though, that's the out of compact waste. Most of that out of compact waste, we're not even allowed to put into the compact waste facility because we can't put bulk waste into the compact waste facility. So most of that waste wouldn't even have an alternative without the low activity waste facility. So at least from our perspective as the operator, we don't really see competition between the two. We see a synergy between the two, though, absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlson? Well, we appreciate all the information, Dave. And with that, we can move on to item 9 on our agenda, which is a chairman's report, which will be a little more lengthy today than it has been in the past. First off, item 9A is fiscal matters. We are coming up to our budget time. Our next meeting will be when we approve our budget. This is always confusing to me, so let me explain it to everyone. The way we work is obviously when the legislature grants us an appropriation, it's for forward-looking. So the budget we will be passing for what would be the fiscal year beginning September 1st, 2020 through August 31st, 2021 is money that has already been approved by the legislature. However, we will also be going through the appropriation process coming soon, which will be our request to the legislature for the next 2 years appropriation. Obviously, in light of the situation of the world, and in particular the situation in Texas with both a depressed oil and gas market and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously I think we should expect to be asked to skinny down our budget by some degree. We don't know what yet, but I think we should be thinking as frugally as possible. So I may ask some of you to help with that, to figure out where we can find cost savings in our budget. That will be important, I think, as we go to the appropriation process. As for the coming year's fiscal budget, it will likely look very similar to the past years. However, if any of you have anything that you think we need to rearrange, or that is a new expense that we need to look at or move money around, I will probably distribute last year's budget and let everyone look at that in advance of the July 9th meeting. And then I will propose a new budget that I will work on in between now and then. And then if anyone has any questions or suggested changes or whatever, we can then discuss those at the July 9th meeting. But my hope is that we would vote out that budget at the July 9th meeting. It's usually boring, and I know most people, their eyes roll back in their head when we talk about budgets, but this year, because of the issues we've been facing in the world, it may be a little more involved and detailed. So we will probably be looking to several of you to help with that. Item 9B is the appointment of a capacity committee. We have discussed this on multiple occasions in the past, and I think it's time that we go ahead and form one. I have talked to Commissioner Edwards, and she has graciously agreed to be in charge of it. And Commissioner Morris has agreed to also serve on it. She has now set the record for serving on, I think, 4 committees at once. So we are overloading her for sure. But the entire, what I envision the mission of the capacity committee to be is, I think one of the points of confusion, both internally on the commission, but even with the public, is ensuring that we use kind of a common set of terms and definitions to define what capacity really is. We hear a lot of different capacity terms, anything from permitted to available through the expansion of the permit to as constructed, and even that may have some nuance to it. So what I'm hoping the committee will do is look at all those different ways capacity has been reported in the past and decide which one is most accurate, and then help define it. So once we start talking about capacity as we move forward, we're kind of all on the same sheet of music. I think there is a lot of, that sounds relatively simple, and I hope it's simple, but I think there's some nuance in that, there's everything from the current cell and how far the concrete goes up in that cell, which may be a consideration to take into account in deciding what capacity is, to maybe even making some determinations as to what true capacity is available at any given point, and helping determine, in working with our in-compact generators, what their needs are versus what projected needs of out-of-compact generators are, to know that we are staying on top of the capacity issue, which I think is one of our main charges under our statute, to know that when we say we have adequate capacity, we can put some meat on that bone and explain why. So I think that is my general thought on the capacity committee, and I will ask Commissioner Edwards if she has any other thoughts on what the committee should do and some of the issues that she may want to tackle as the capacity committee.
Well, I'm thinking that there's a lot of different terms. There's licensed capacity, there's built capacity, there's available capacity, there's reserved capacity. And I think creating a picture of that should be relatively straightforward, but I hope to be able to reach out to Mr. Carlson and WCS for some support with creating that picture, and get input from the commissioners, whether it's clear, whatever we start to come up with.
And also the TCEQ has a capacity report, I think, that's in progress or almost ready.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at that also, I would assume.
Great.
And one of the charges of the committee may be to help us fully understand what the TCEQ report says and break it down for us dummies who aren't as technically smart as the rest of you to understand what it all really means too.
Do we know when that report will be available?
Maybe someone here could tell us.
Would anyone from TCEQ be willing to raise their hand? I think they're all quickly jumping off the call so they don't have to speak.
I could do some outreach.
I'm sure we can figure that out. Commissioner Janeka.
Yeah, hi there. The answer.
Yes, sir.
I don't have the answer, but we'll work on getting that and can email it afterwards. I think our deadline in the past has been December 1 of the calendar year preceding the legislative session, and the new statutory requirement is only that we do it every 4 years. So I don't believe we're constrained by a specific statutory deadline any longer, but we'll be happy to inquire and circle back. Apologies not to have that information readily available.
No problem. We did not mean to put anybody on the spot. So, but it will dovetail nicely, I think, with what the capacity committee is doing, because that will further help illuminate everybody kind of on what the capacity issues are, if any. So, I appreciate Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Morris for being willing to serve on that. Anybody have any questions about the capacity committee?
I would ask that they consider, to some degree, the demographic trends in the state. So if we continue the continued increase of people moving here, if y'all could try and do a forecast in the future, considering the if it continues, on this trend of increasing, how would that affect the life of the facility to put the materials in? Because if we assume it's just fixed at today's population and, incoming waste stream based on current projection, that's X. But if we continue on that upward curve we've had over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that may look like a different number. So I would just ask for that as one factor to consider.
Okay.
I may have to reach out to Commissioner Mundy on that. I can understand a connection between projections of new facilities being built in like nuclear power plants, which dwarf the volumes or activity that are sent by any small generators to the disposal facility. But I'm not aware of any direct correlation between the population in a state and the volume of radioactive waste that's generated.
I'm just assuming, this wouldn't be power plant stream, but the other collateral things that come in. And maybe you just answered my question. If there's zero correlation to population, in the state or nationally, if that doesn't affect the volumes, then that was really the question I had. I just assumed as you have over 20, 30, 40 years, an increase in population, you have an increase in commercial activity, and whether that would generate a curve that goes up.
One possible source of information on that might be to see if the state of Texas, the Texas Department of State Health Services, is issuing new or more radioactive material licenses. If that's the case, then there may be a correlation between new licensees and possibly generation of rad waste.
That's what I'm just trying to consider on a forward-looking basis. Will the life of this thing change if the population curve goes up?
You mean more X-rays, more activity that maybe not at the reactor level or the utility level, but on the individual level.
Correct. Some of these other things that are outside of the power plant streams.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the capacity committee?
Looks like
all right.
Commissioner Janeka is raising his hand to do something. Ask a question or.
I don't want to speak. This is Bobby Janeka. I don't want to speak out of turn. I just wanted to offer a response if that might be helpful. I appreciate that question, Commissioner Mundy, and I can tell you that to date, our analysis in the capacity report has not taken such a broad forward look, perspective look on potential growth. We have taken our analysis out to the life of the license of the current 2 operating plants in Texas, as well as assuming expansions at both of those plants in the past. There were applications before the NRC. Currently, I think there's only 1 application still pending from one of our nuclear facilities, but that's the biggest driver for the total volume number in the state when we're looking at this question as a policy question for the legislature. So our agency really had to limit the scope of how many rabbit holes we went down, and so we tried to bound it at that reactor, the power generation activity. But I think your question is a very, very good one, in that if there are new reactor licenses issued in our state, it would dramatically change that capacity report picture. And so I think you're absolutely correct. That's something that we certainly could look to, but I think we have somewhat limited capacity to do so outside of making broad assumptions. The issuance of a new license for a reactor, a new operational facility, is a fairly rare occurrence. So I'm not sure that we felt the need to go down that path, but could.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, maybe they all have answered the question, but I'm just thinking over 20, 30, 40 years, if somebody at least just ponders the question, maybe the answer is that will have no effect. That sounds like what Lisa and Linda are saying. It's really not going to change based on where we are today.
Okay. I still think that's worth some consideration, though, because if we had a massive population expansion, I mean, I suppose, depending on what you think I'm assuming at some point, someone has sat down and said, each human who lives within your state on average generates a certain minimal amount of low-level radioactive waste, whether it be through their x-rays or, manufacturing of exit signs or whatever the case may be. And so I understand what you're saying, that if the population expanded greatly over the next 30 or 40 years, it could expand the amount of low-level radioactive waste that our state generates.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if that's enough to move the needle, or if it's so minimal that it would never really even be considered anything more than de minimis. Any other questions for the capacity committee? Okay.
Chairman, I've got one for you on the budget. So July the 9th, we're going to look at the now biennium budget for us, and then also maybe approve the next biennium budget. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So we will approve. We will approve the actual budget for the fiscal year that starts on September 1st, 2020, and then we will also discuss what the request is going to be of the legislature for our next 2 years after the coming fiscal year.
That's 21, 22.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I had that right in my head.
Thank you. That's a good clarification. The next item on the chairman's report is a report on communications with other compacts. I put this on there because I have received a communication from an executive director of another compact who called with kind of the very basic inquiry of, the compact waste facility is important to us. What can we do to help? And it started a conversation that I thought could lead to some very productive agreements that I wanted you all to know what my plan was and see if anyone had any thoughts on it. After that conversation that I had, I contacted Dan Schrum and said, listen, this makes sense, and it makes sense to coordinate this through the low-level forum. He agreed with me, and he said yes. And I said, do you have any sense of what other compacts may be willing to do to support our facility? And he said, I don't know. He goes, and I think it may be different on a compact by compact basis based on their needs. A compact that has multiple utilities, reactors in it would probably have more of an interest than maybe a compact that doesn't have but one. And so he goes, I'm not sure what they're willing to do. And I said, well, rather than try to knock them all down individually, I think some sort of group meeting among the compacts makes sense. And he said, of course, and that's what we're here for. So I am in the discussion phase with Dan Schrum and maybe other compact executive directors or chairmen to figure out what the most efficient and effective way to do this. I don't know where it will lead. My hope is that we can impress upon everybody and all the other compacts the importance of supporting the Texas Compact Waste Facility and see what they're willing to do to support it. I don't know what format that may take. I don't, obviously a lot of compacts don't have millions of dollars laying around to support our compact with some sort of deposit or financial assistance, but there may be other things that can be done. So I want to explore this because I think it's important, and I think it's a primary reason that we both rejoin the low-level forum, and it's exactly what the mission of the forum is. So I wanted to let you all know that, see if any of you had any thoughts on maybe how those communications should go, or what points we should make when those communications occur. But I think it's a positive development, and I think it may lead to nothing, but I'm hoping that it leads to something very positive. So with that, I'll open the floor to see if anybody wants to comment on this.
Sounds like a good initiative.
I hope it is, and we'll see where it goes. But I think these are the kind of things that, I mean, I don't think I'm going too far on a limb to say, obviously, the facility in Andrews County is very important to a lot of both compacts and unaffiliated states who have nowhere else to put their B&C waste. And I think it will become more important in the future as plants decommission, because obviously, as we've seen from Vermont and in other states, for very good reason, a lot of states do not want their B&C waste stored on site, and I don't blame them at all for that. And we have a wonderful facility that's been very well engineered and built, and therefore it is a natural it's a natural fit. The problem is that no one knows the timing of the need, and therefore I think going out and talking to people about A, what they expect to need, and B, what they're willing to do to help support the facility and otherwise maintain its viability is a worthwhile effort. So
I guess I would make one comment. I think I've said something similar to this in the past, but you know, every compact has a statutory obligation to provide a disposal pathway for the waste that their compact generates. And we are the only compact that built a new facility to do that. Of course, Richland and the Atlantic Compact have Barnwell and the Richland facility. But other than that, there's a number of compacts that have not yet, 30 years later, maybe almost 40 years later, satisfied that statutory obligation, which we, out of the goodness of our hearts, are satisfying. And it's a weird position to be in, because we really need that out of compact waste to make this site commercially viable. But at the same time, we are shouldering the costs associated with the disposal site. So it would seem to me that there's a reasonable discussion that could be had about looking at what the compacts that do not have a disposal venue for their waste, that are utilizing the site in Texas, you know, how they can contribute to help keep this site open.
thank you, Lisa. And I agree. And I think we heard a lot of that when we had our meeting with the Southwest Compact. I think other compacts have expressed their interest in the fact that they are dependent upon our facility. And so I think the time is right to have these discussions and at least see where they lead. So any other comments on the topic of talking to other compacts? All right, then we will move on to item 9D, which is something we've already discussed in part, which is the NRC comment letter to the proposed interpretation of the very low level radioactive waste disposal regulations. We included in your packet under item tab 14, the notice and then the extension of the time for comment. That lays out the actual proposed interpretation and the specifics of what the NRC is doing. I have spoken to Vice Chairman Salzman, the judge, and Commissioner Saudick, and they have agreed, I believe, to serve as the ad hoc committee to draft a comment letter on behalf of the commission to the NRC. The NRC has specifically asked us to comment, and so I think they have acknowledged that our opinion on this is relevant and important. I know that the low-level forum is also formulating a comment letter, which I'm assuming we will get to review and either sign on to, or if we choose, maybe not sign on to. But I wanted to inform everybody that John, the judge, and Dick will be taking this issue on. I think the previous discussion when Dave Carlson was presenting is really what this issue is about. My opinion is I don't know that as a commission, if we want to get into the technical merits of the proposed interpretation, But I do think it's important that we at least state clearly the impact we believe it could have on the compact waste facility. And I think Dave alluded to those earlier. And obviously I'm open to any comments or questions anybody has on that. But I think it's important that we at least make our voice heard at the NRC on this issue so we can explain what impact we think it's going to have on the compact waste facility. Does anybody else have any comments or suggestions on it?
Well, Brandon, I would have to just offer up that from a health and safety perspective, for me, it's deeply concerning that we would, in my opinion, be taking a step backwards to allow low-level radioactive waste to go to municipal landfills. I mean, I can see perhaps some circumstances, but that was the whole reason why 10 CFR 61 was passed, so that we would not have waste being disposed of in locations that may or may not be appropriate. And, you know, in the long term, this has the potential to create a bunch of waste sites that we then have to go back and remediate. I've personally been involved in those. It's a tremendous effort. It's a tremendous cost. It really does has the potential to jeopardize public health and safety. So I look forward to the opportunity of commenting on what they're proposing.
And so everyone knows the plan is that the comment period ends on July 20th. So we will have one more meeting before that. So what I'm hoping is that the committee gets us a draft of the comment letter, then we can discuss it at the July 9th meeting, approve it, change it, whatever we need to do to it, and then obviously get it to the NRC before the July 20th deadline. Anybody else have any comments on that?
I would ask, if I could ask a sort of a question, and that is, would it be acceptable for us to perhaps invite maybe WCS or TCEQ or even, you know, members of the public, if they have information they would like to provide to the commission on this subject, that they send us that information?
I know that TCEQ is also formulating a comment letter, which we can definitely seek their guidance, and WCS and any other relevant interested parties that you guys as the ad hoc committee want to seek input from. And I think all that's relevant, obviously, because I'm sure there's multiple of us that would want to hear from one or more of those interested parties that you just described. So I think all that's on the table.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I've been dealing with this for since Friday, since it kind of broke. So I've took it on myself to notify the Commissioner's Court. I like one commissioner, I hadn't got him yet. And then hopefully today I'll get with the city manager and maybe the mayor on this to let them know so it won't be under the radar of the city and the county. So I think the county's drafting some stuff. I can't really say what they're going to do because they hadn't met and they hadn't approved it. But we are aware of it as a county. The judge is aware of it, and hopefully we'll get some letters from the community to the NRC by that time. My other thing was, besides that, I just want to ask you all if you have any things, since said I'd be on that committee where John and myself and whoever else is, I can't remember, to, you know, write that or call me, or so I can write it down so we will be ready on the July the 9th to maybe fire off something to the NRC. I don't know what that's going to look like. I do think it has to deal with our, just like everything's been talked about today, the money of the site. So I'm not for sure where our commission is going to, I don't know what our letter looks like versus what the local community or generally the nuclear waste people is going to look like. Hoping that they're going to chime in on this. I know that the some other people's already commented, this has been out there for like 10 years and just got kind of like thrown up on us. So I think we need to make a comment. I don't know what that's going to look like, but if any of the commissioners have any comments, please call one of the commissioners that's on this committee so we can kind of write that down and be ready to talk about it on the 9th. That's really all I got, Mr. Chairman, on that.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Judge. And I think, you know, synthesizing all those different interested parties is part of the job of the committee, and we'll decide kind of what should go in and what should not. But ultimately, I assume that, you know, people like the county, the city, obviously TCEQ, WCS, they will all be submitting hopefully their own comment letters, and there may be some overlap in those, but you know, obviously I want to make sure that we cover all the issues that we think are most relevant to us while taking into account all those other parties' positions as well.
Brandon, if I could ask a question of Dave Gordon, should any information or I should say, should any thoughts by commissioners be sent to you rather than to individual commissioners?
Well, outside of the committee, you don't want to be communicating with one another, so you could send them to me. The comments could go to the committee, though, if that would be useful for the committee in formulating their letter. The outsider comments, that ones that the commission would solicit.
Right.
Okay.
So just in consideration of the Open Meetings Act and not wanting to violate that, there is a lot of work that's been done related to disposal of very low activity waste or very low level waste, as most of the world calls it, in an industrial disposal cell. And I think in any arguments that we put forward, we want to be careful to make the distinction between an industrial disposal facility, RCRA site, and a municipality, which I think is subpart D. Clearly, we're exercising the first option. We've already licensed it in Texas to dispose of low activity waste in a industrial landfill type of environment, and we have found that suitable. I think it's highly defensible. The real question here comes, in my mind, based upon the subpart D concept, or if I'm not getting the subpart right, the municipality. It's hard for me to believe that a lot of people are going to want to put their radioactive waste in a municipality, because that's just like a headline generator. And there's a certain amount of liability that goes with it. And I think there's some costs that the municipality may have to incur in order to be able to show or demonstrate compliance with the requirement. But nonetheless, it's a pretty big change. The thing that I would say is that low activity waste cell in Texas helps keep the disposal cell for class B and C waste, the only one that is open to receiving waste from all nuclear power plants in the country, the only one that really meets the statutory requirements set out by the Compact Commission, is here in Texas, and its economic viability would be impacted if, well, let's just say its economic viability is tied to the low activity waste cell we have at the WCS site, and that this new regulation would challenge that economic viability. That's sort of where my head falls. I have told Chairperson Hurley that you know, I recuse myself from this. I've done research in this area, and EPRI has, my employer has stances that it's taken in public venues on this issue, and so I've recused myself in terms of being on the committee.
And I do think that if anyone else has a desire to kind of comment on their thoughts on what our position should be, now is a good time to do it, because it would help the committee to understand what everyone's thinking. if you want to think about it and provide those comments later, you can as well. But if anyone has thoughts now that they want to share, it's absolutely the right time to do it.
Well, I'll say I'm looking at section 7 of the letter, and then they have 5 questions. This kind of was asking Dave earlier, but these questions are so vague and ambiguous, they really don't make any sort of distinctions or explanations about what they really are. And so my concern is this thing could just go several different unintended directions depending on how they really promulgate a rule. So I think, somebody's got to really burrow down and get some more specificity on at least the way they've written these questions do not have very defined scope in them at all.
Yeah, Jeff, what I'm seeing, or what I've seen, is that the way this was propagated by the NRC, they can just maybe, and it's been in the Federal Register, just say tomorrow, maybe this is it. I don't know if that is it legally or whatever, but it's nobody's had any Congress or nobody else has had any oversight of this little rule that they've made, and I think it's going to come back to bite them, actually.
It's just so vague. I mean, it's just, I look at these 5 questions and it's hard to really make an intelligent analysis the way they've asked it. It's just non-specific and really broad. So that's my starting point for concern.
I had students run a project a number of years ago, and they surveyed permitted landfills, and the results regarding low-level waste or radioactive material entering their facility, and the results were astonishing. Really, there was a great lack of knowledge, equipment, training. So that's something to take into consideration. What's their current status? Some of the big operators did have some sophisticated equipment, but the majority of the permittees that we received responses from, not.
So I've done work for solid waste facilities, and they run kind of like Lisa. I mean, they run the gamut from incredibly sophisticated. Like I can think of some of the hazmat facilities around Houston versus, some municipal operations, which are a little more than the guy with a bulldozer. And it just, I just am concerned by the potential for unintended consequences of this rulemaking.
And there was a previous phone call that the NRC held that I attended, and some of you might have as well, where they allowed public comment. And what Jeff and Linda are saying was brought up by more than one commenter about how, this really has no specificity, and it could really have a lot of unintended consequences. And because the original deadline was actually, I want to say back in March or April, because of the pandemic, the other big comment was you have to extend this. So the NRC did extend it, but I do think that the majority of the people that commented on the call that day, one of their concerns were that this kind of seemed to be like a floodgate problem, that if you opened it up, you really don't know what the outcome may be because of a lack of specificity. So that may be something for the committee to consider as well, as the unintended consequences that may occur, and which could obviously impact the compact waste facility as well. But in a more general sense, just the lack of real guidance from the proposed interpretation could lead to some very strange consequences.
Yeah, I mean, the NRC may have one thing in mind, and they write their rule, and it's just people take advantage of gaps and openings, and I would really like to see a lot more clarity in definitions and scope.
Well, I want to make sure that we open it up to the public as well. If anybody has any comments that they believe the commission ought to hear as we are formulating our comments. We heard Dave Carlson's comments about this issue, and I'm sure he would reiterate those at this point. But is there anybody else who would like to, from the public, who would like to comment on the commission's forthcoming comment letter to NRC?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody want to comment from our 2 power plants, but that'd be good. I don't know that y'all can't comment because you're here to watch, but I think your comments need to be put in the record at some point due to the fact the legislature in the county of Andrews and its people have gone way above to get that site. I hate to lose it in one stroke of a pen. I mean, I really don't think we're going to do that, but I mean, the legislature has gone, and there was a point, Lisa, I don't remember if you know it, but they actually said in some law that you have a couple of years to join our commission if you want to pay to get in. So there was some states could join our compact when they changed the law again. So, but nobody wanted to do that because it's all about the buck, and that's what I'm scared about. This is it's all about the buck.
Right.
I was aware that the compact was open, to other states.
Yeah.
I think it still is, but it still has to be ratified by Congress. So it's a pretty big move at this point to have a new member of the compact join. I'm not sure if that's the only avenue that we could consider for a relationship with the other compacts.
Yeah, I don't know, since we're probably the only ones going to build a site.
The other question is they talk about without case-by-case review or approval of a transfer. So how would this work then?
Yeah.
So there's a
Something to
NCFR
look at.
20.2002 allows a generator to request an exemption from the NRC to send a particular volume of waste to an alternate disposal location. This is exercised frequently using a disposal site that's a RCRA disposal site in the state of Idaho.
Yeah,
so these exemption requests get sent off either directly by the generator or with help from the disposal site, and the NRC approves an exemption. And they are finally producing some guidance related to how they approve or disapprove those exemption requests. But largely it's been sort of opaque to the public on how that decision is made. And so basically it's a few millirem. If it looks like it's going to be less than a few millirem, it's been approved. So this first question, I think, relates to, it's referencing that existing process and asking whether you think, do people have to do this case by case every time? Or is there a certain level, pardon me, of waste that is doesn't require that case by case exemption?
Well, I mean, question one says very clearly, though, without approval of transfer. So that just like gets back to that. There's kind of vagueness about limitations of where they really envision this going. And I just, if what you said were true, it should be in their rulemaking, and that's just not there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly can't speak for the NRC. I'm just, based upon my experience, this is my interpretation of the question. The other thing that happened really before you joined the commission, and I'm going to paraphrase here, so just, there was a site that would ship waste to a facility that was approved by the state of Texas to receive sort of a low-level radioactive waste. But because the site that was shipping that waste was under a Part 50 license, they couldn't ship it directly that way. The site thought, I'm a licensee licensed by the US NRC, and I have, pardon me, a disposal site that my state has approved. I should be able, I can't continue without some water and I'm all out.
All right.
Excuse me.
So I guess what this leads to though is at what level does our comment need to dig in? And it sounds like there are both substantive questions about the proposed NRC interpretation in addition to the very basic idea of the financial impact it's going to have potentially on the compact waste facility.
Yeah.
And I think all that's fine. I mean, the question is, what kind of resources and time do we have to devote to this, and what do we think it will take to really do an analysis at the level that we're all talking about?
I just, I'll make one last comment and I'll quit commenting. But the way they've written their questions, they seem to envision everybody knows this is how we're doing it. X, they're thinking, or we think they mean Rickroll, as use that example. But the way they write it does not have that limitation attached to it. And then they give this open-ended clause of without case-by-case review or approval. So what if there's some generator says, I see this vagueness in this thing and I can send it off somewhere else, and there's no limitation here, and no one has the right to say, no, you can't do that. If they generate a rule says there's no review and no approval required, and there's not this inherent limitation that we think, here's the framework, 99% of people will be honest and do the right thing, but there's 1% that'll do the wrong thing, and they'll just take the cheapest way out on something. So that's apart from the economic consideration to WCS, but I'm just saying I could just see a person who is not right-minded trying to drive through some of these ambiguities. But that first thing where it just says no review required, that just, to me, it's like saying, well, don't speed on the highway, but the police will never stop you.
Right.
Well, I don't think it's quite like that.
Okay.
I mean, right now, there are rules and regulations in place that allow you to ship radioactive waste to licensed disposal sites. And you don't have to send something in and have the NRC say,
No.
oh, yeah, you can ship that to that disposal site and put it in there. There's a license, and so you're just following the rules and
Okay.
shipping it there. This would be sort of the same thing. They're saying for a certain type of waste, you could ship it directly to that disposal site. But it's still incumbent upon you to follow the rules, just like it is for higher activity levels of waste. It's just this exemption process doesn't have to be gone through. At least that's my interpretation.
So Lisa, is what you're saying that at the gate, when someone pulls up with a shipment, they hand over whatever documentation that says, here is the current radioactivity of the load I'm carrying. And from that point, the disposal facility can completely rely on that documentation and does not have to verify, for lack of a better phrase, what the radioactivity is of that waste?
Well, they have their own processes at each disposal facility to do that. There's spot checking, there's calculations they run. The point is that for the waste to leave the site of the generator and arrive at that gate, it doesn't require a special case-by-case review by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission before they ship that waste. There are rules that are in place that have to be followed to put it on the road and offer it for transport. Those rules are met, people just do it. Then the waste arrives and WCS has to decide to accept it in TCEQ or whatever disposal site it's going to. There's not an exemption process or some process that the NRC has to go through and say, yes, you're approved to ship this waste to that facility. Right now, to ship the waste to any other facility besides a licensed disposal facility, generators do have to go through that review. They have to submit that paperwork, have it reviewed prior to offering that shipment for transport to go to this alternate disposal site. Does that make sense?
Okay. So, Lisa, does anybody have the right to say, let's say there's no, quote, approval required in advance, but who has the right to reject it and say there's a problem with this load? You're sending the wrong thing to the wrong place. This is not very low level. This is B or C or something else. Who would have a right to reject that?
The licensee is inspected at a nuclear power plant on some frequency. When I was there, I think it was every 2 years. It might have been extended now, where their whole radioactive waste management program is reviewed by a federal regulator who visits the site. There's a constant NRC present on site to look at these kinds of things on the day-to-day operations, but there are specific inspection modules associated with the management of the radioactive waste system. So that includes shipment of waste. So they'd be subject there, like any disposal site. Dave and his team can reject something that comes to their site if they do not believe it meets their acceptance criteria. They can.
I'm not worried about Dave. I'm just worried about some generator seeing what they think is I'm not worried about stuff going to Dave's facility at all. My concern is that somebody with a lawyer that's trying to be clever looks at this and says, hey, we can divert this somewhere else outside this framework, and no one has a right to stop us. That's what my concern is.
I'm not worried about Dave either. I think there's always people who will try to break the law, and hopefully they get caught and get the right consequences for that. I'm no expert on municipality disposal sites. I do understand some of them have monitors where a shipment comes in and it looks for activity, looks for any dose coming off of the site that is unexpected off of the load. So I don't know what kind of controls they routinely put into place to screen for things, but I presume that any generator of radioactive waste would manifest it as such, provide a basis for what they think makes it reasonable to dispose it there.
Lisa, just give you one perspective. Past experience I had was in the Houston area. People were taking hazmat and just dumping it in a basic solid waste facility. Literally the driver, the plant owner would say, take it over here, and they drive it in, back it up, and just unleash it. And that's kind of the context for where I'm asking questions. And that's, like I say, 99% of people are honest, but I worry about that 1%. And I want to make sure we don't unintentionally have big, ambiguities in these comments or these questions that would leave the door open to that kind of scenario.
You're on the committee, right? I think it's good that you're on the committee, because this is a perspective that, my experience and background has been mostly in the utility industry. And, they're very much rule followers.
Yeah.
Part of the DNA there. So my experience sort of speaks from that perspective.
Yeah.
Your experience, has been exposed to different things. So I think that will help round out our comments.
And this kind of goes to the fundamental issue that's before the NRC, I think, in that it's a blanket exemption versus a case-by-case exemption, which is required now under the current version of the rules, I thought. And so I thought that was one of the primary complaints that people were having, is that this more blanket type of exemption to put very low-level waste into these alternate sites was one of the concerns that a lot of people had, was that you, in fact, are now allowing what Jeff is talking about, where before, because it was exempted on a shipment by shipment basis, that was much harder to do.
There's some level of oversight attached to that.
Right. And so is that kind of the fundamental issue that's going on with the NRC's proposed interpretation, or I mean, obviously WCS has their RECRA exemption, which was very specifically handed down to them after a request in coordination with the TCEQ, and we all know what that process takes. And that process presumably satisfied NRC for that type of exemption. And so what's being proposed now seems to be a little bit more than what obviously the TCEQ WCS exemption is at the RECRA facility in Andrews, in that this would be interpreted to authorize people on a blanket basis to ship whatever the measurement is of very low level waste into these facilities, and it wouldn't even follow the process that WCS and TCEQ currently use at the RECRA site. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I don't think those are the only reasons, though. WCS is licensed, by the NRC. So when a Part 50 license, a nuclear power plant, ships to WCS, that's authorized. It's a licensee to licensee transfer. Both licensees have radioactive material licenses, and that's acknowledged by the federal government. So when WCS receives a shipment and they have a process to decide which facility it goes into, they can use that process, and it's all above board. If WCS said, I'm going to ship this down the road to a different facility, they could do that because they are a licensed processor of waste. But in the state of Texas, and it's assuming that other facility that they're going to ship it to, that the state of Texas, as an agreement state, has approved them to receive that waste, they can ship it there. What happened is the original generator, the nuclear power plant, skipped the middle step and went right to that processor directly. And there was a big brouhaha over this. So in an inspection process that was discovered, even though it was an activity that had continued for years, from one licensee to another licensee, she said that other licensee was approved by the state of Texas and not by the US government. Everybody thought they were in compliance, but there was a question raised about whether it really was compliant. And that whole event is a big contributor, I think, to some of what you're seeing happening with this very low level waste, because it was all very low activity waste. Maybe it was even like sewage type of waste. And it seemed nonsensical. This generator couldn't ship directly to that party and would have to go through a processor or a broker to do so.
Commissioner Janeka, I saw that you raised your hand. Did you have a comment?
Thank you. I did just want to provide a little context on this request. I think y'all have characterized it pretty well, what the NRC is proposing, Commissioner Edwards, and I think y'all have recognized many of the salient differences in the current regulatory scheme and what this noticed reinterpretation would allow. It is very similar to the approval that the TCQ has given for that narrow RCRA disposal pathway through WCS's license. In some respects, in that our agency analyzed a broader waste stream rather than a single discrete shipment. And so I think that speaks to the my understanding, the way that I read the noticed action from NRC was that they are proposing to take that interpretation, that they will utilize a similar approach for their 2002 case-by-case exemption process going forward, which would be a waste stream authorization, waste stream-based authorization, rather than discrete individual shipments. The big difference there is, as Commissioner Edwards pointed out, whether it can go to a licensed recipient or an unlicensed recipient, specifically authorized for those narrow purposes. But then the other piece is that difference in the degree of radioactivity. Up until now, Commissioner Edwards is absolutely right. The standard has been a few millirem in terms of the resulting dose, the performance of the waste in considering whether it would be appropriate for disposal in an alternative, non-Part 61 disposal facility or other regulatory pathway. This proposal from the NRC is significantly larger than that. They have proposed a 25 millirem standard, and I think that certainly is another sharp difference. I would caution you, and I think our agency is very willing, if you have questions about specifics and the differences in the NRC's regulatory pathway that they are contemplating these actions around, and how the TCQ has taken our actions, because we don't have exactly that that rule standard, that exemption process in our rules. We have not adopted any analogous like-for-like rule. We relied on a broader exemption rule in our state rules to process our authorization for the RECRA cell. However, we are very eager to provide any answers that y'all might have, because I think it is very similar in a lot of ways. And so I think one thing I will be very concerned about as I'm reviewing our agency's any comments that we would propose to provide, I think it would be very important to make sure that we stake out what our agency has done and we try to defend it. And so I would encourage y'all, as you're considering your comments, please feel free to ask us if you'd like us to review or identify any potential room where your comments may cast criticisms or call into question what our agency has done. I'd love to have our staff identify that for y'all before you turn anything loose to the public. Thank you.
I think that's very important. Thank you.
Commissioner Jenkins.
Yes, sir.
Do you have, if this thing went into effect as written, would you have any sort of oversight capability for things under this new rule? Do you think,
I'm not sure.
They say without approval, do you think TCEQ would still have some authority to make sure things are going into the right place?
That is a fair question, and I'm not certain that Texas as an agreement state would have clear abilities to contradict or halt any authorization directly by NRC for these sorts of exemptions. But because it's reliant on the dose-based standard, I would expect that any requests would need to go through our state's local notice process. Any site in Texas that wanted to try to avail themselves of this new flexibility that the NRC has proposed would almost certainly need to make a revision to their permit. Whatever operating permit they have, I would be shocked to learn that it could accommodate this without any changes, and typically that would require some public notice. If you're talking about increasing types of wastes, increasing amounts of wastes, the general standard our agency tends to utilize is that the public always gets a chance to comment if regulated entities are going to do more of the activity they're currently regulated to do, and even just changing the way they do it often will require that public comment, just making an amendment to whatever their operating permit is. So I would expect we would probably have many opportunities or we would be involved. I'm just not clear exactly what chance we would have to contradict the NRC if they considered a request independent of the actual operating permit for the site itself.
Well, that's why I just keep getting hung up on this clause where it says without case-by-case review or approval of a transfer. And I just would like somebody to have some level of at least the ability to exercise oversight, kind of keep honest people honest, if you will.
I very much appreciate your point. And as far as I read that to mean without NRC approval or review, but in our case, in terms of looking at the RECRA disposal exemption as an analog in Texas, if it were done for a permitted facility in Texas in the future, I'm sure that our agency would look very strongly at any requirements to make sure that if the NRC isn't approving, that the state certainly is reviewing and approving. And we are doing that for our RECRA disposal pathway. So in terms of what the NRC is contemplating, certainly the state continues to take a very lively role in being engaged in the approach that we've taken. Well, again, that's not to say that it's the same approach at all. It is a different regulatory authority under which it's done, but it is similar.
I would, if y'all are writing a comment, I would just like somebody to add a phrase to that it's subject to Yeah, I just want some limitation on this and that it's tied into an existing framework. Like I said, I think it's just unintended consequence or the potential for it, the way they've written it. That's what just keeps bothering me.
Thank you.
Dave Carlson, I saw that you raised your hand. Would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, just if I could put a couple things on background. The first one is to talk specifically about the compact waste facility. When waste is transferred from licensee to licensee, such as a nuclear power plant, but any licensee, someone who has radioactive material to our facility, we have a requirement to do a generator certification. So we go out and inspect their programs to make sure that the programs that they use to ensure the waste they send to us is correct. We make sure that those are working properly, and we have to do that on an annual basis. So we ensure that their programs are okay, and then we accept their waste based on what's on the manifest for those types of generators. And that's how it normally works, licensee to licensee.
Okay.
In the case of our exempt facility, it's very different. In our differences from what the NRC is proposing is, first off, the 1 millirem is our limit for our performance assessment for that facility versus the 25 millirem that the NRC is proposing. But the other difference is that we do a case-by-case evaluation of everything that comes in based on what we're instructed to do by the state of Texas by TCEQ. So we don't trust what's coming into that facility. We are not able to just take the profile and say, yep, we'll just dispose of it based on that profile. We actually go through an evaluation of that waste, similar to what a RCRA facility would. And we do things like gamma spectroscopy to ensure that we know the radionuclides in it and the abundance of those radionuclides, and have health physicists actually do an evaluation of that assessment of that waste stream that's coming in to verify that it fits inside the framework of what we can take into that facility.
Right.
So, that's by way of background to give you a sense of comfort of what we're doing in those two facilities to ensure that we can't, there's no case to be bamboozled by a generator somehow that something comes into either of those facilities that would not be expected. Now, it's not clear to me how that would happen under the NRC regulation as proposed. The last thing I would say, and just to add on to what Commissioner Janeka said, at least it's my belief and my understanding that an agreement states that agreement state would have authority even over this process. So Texas, as an agreement state, the regulator for disposal of radioactive materials is TCEQ, and my belief, based on what I've read so far, is that Texas would continue to have that authority, and I think we're okay in Texas from that perspective. There are states that aren't agreement states, such as Idaho or Michigan or West Virginia or Connecticut, where the NRC would have the authority, and there isn't a state agency that would have that authority. So I hope that provides a little bit of background.
That's helpful. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Any other comments about this before we move on? Okay, I think we have identified that this is A, an important issue, and B, has some nuance to it. So we will look forward to hearing what the committee generates. And if anyone has additional comments within the commission, it sounds like Dave Gordon has said you can send those directly to the committee. If non-commission members want to communicate with the committee, they need to route that through Dave Gordon. Is that correct, Dave? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
With that, then we will move on to item 10, which is a discussion and possible action regarding the contingency plan described in section 3.04 of our governing statute. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Mundy, who is the chairman of our contingency planning committee, for a report.
Before we go through that, is there time for a break?
You know what? That's probably not a bad idea. So why don't we take 10 minutes, and I guess we could just leave everything open, Andrew? Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. I can pause the recording and then just restart the recording when we reconvene.
Okay, so the time now is 11:11. Let's try to be back by 11:25. Gives everybody 15 minutes to go do whatever they need to do.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to bow out at 11:30 your time. But
Does that cause us to lose our quorum? It doesn't, does it?
That won't bother your quorum.
We'll be okay with quorum.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know, Dick. We will be back at 11:25 then.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we are recording and you are host.
Thank you. So it is 11:25 and we are back from our break. We will continue on with our agenda. The next item on the agenda was item 10, which is the discussion and a possible action on our contingency plan. And Commissioner Mundy is the chairman of that, and I will just turn it over to him for a brief update about where we are and where we're hoping to head in the next couple of weeks with our contingency planning. Commissioner Mundy. I think you're on mute.
Okay, did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, it will be short. First, there's no action proposed or required today, so it's just a short report, but the committee has started meeting by teleconference every week, typically on Thursday afternoons. However, we're not going to meet this afternoon because we're having our meeting today, and then Chairman Hurley's got a court matter tomorrow, so he needs to be working on. So we'll go back to our regular weekly meeting next Thursday afternoon. And we've started exploring this as we started the dialogue among the committee members. The more we talk, the more we realize there are really several different stakeholder viewpoints, which prompted us to put out a request for comment, hoping to hear from various stakeholders on issues that were important to them. And this exercise, just to be very clear, none of us anticipate the need for it. No one has any awareness or belief that something's imminent. But a year ago, if somebody had told all of us we'd all be sitting at home locked up for a month or two because of this virus, that would seem, just like a crazy idea. But in fact, here we are. So the current situation really emphasizes the need to do planning for a variety of contingencies. And the work began apparently a couple of years ago, and there's a draft document that started into it, but in the course of our committee dialogue, I think we're now heading towards much more detail. The statutes, the organic statutes creating the commission, also talk about certain duties on, quote, the state. In reality, those are essentially delegated for the most part to TCEQ. So the chairman has extended an invitation to TCEQ to send a representative to participate in our dialogue so that we can kind of work on these plans in tandem so they fit together. And so everybody who's listening in today should have hopefully been on our email list that you've signed up for in the past and received a request for comments last week. If you haven't, you can look on the website and it has the request for comments. And we're looking specifically for elements or comments that relate to the elements in the statute that are on the request for comment. So it's not a general purpose request. We're not trying to work on a lot of issues. It's just very discreet work on contingency plans, both for the commission and then the state, which is effectively TCEQ. We are trying to get this done so we can issue a report to the full commission late this summer, no later than Labor Day, but if we can do it sooner, that'd be great. If we could do it by the July meeting, that'd be fantastic. But there is a fair amount of detail involved, at least what we're hoping to give. And so that's really the crux of it, I guess. Would any other committee members have any other comments y'all would like to add to that?
No, that covered everything that I was going to comment on, and I do think we're at the beginning of the process, but we will probably be calling on, like Jeff said, multiple of you who are listening in today for your comments and thoughts and assistance in some way. We have already contacted WCS about some things, and they've been helpful, and so we will continue to do that as well, I'm sure. But otherwise, I agree with everything Jeff has said.
Judge Dolgener, you might mute your mic there.
Any questions?
Y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Any other questions for the?
With hearing y'all, I'm going to have to go. I pretty well missed the last 15 minutes of the meeting, so I'm going to have to go back and listen to it because of connectivity problems. But I'm with you now.
Okay. Anybody else have questions of the contingency plan committee or any comments? Seeing none, then we will say thank you once again to those who are foolishly willing to serve on that committee, and tell them that they'll be in our thoughts and prayers as they move forward, because they'll need it. With that concludes item 10. We will move to item 11, which is personnel matters. The only thing to report here, obviously, our search has been pretty hampered by the events of the world. So we have put on ice whatever efforts we've made to find staff. That will hopefully continue as things get back to normal. But we are very happy to say that we have extended the agreement that we have with Andrew. And as I said before, Andrew has been absolutely invaluable, not just with this meeting, but with a lot of things. Andrew has done the work of 3 people under that contract, and we've extended it so we can continue to get the benefit of his services. So, in Dave, do we need to have a vote to approve that extension, or was it something that I was authorized to do before?
I think what would be most appropriate is just to have the commissioners vote to ratify the extension. And
okay.
To be clear, that holdover extension will just go to the end of this fiscal year, which is August 31, 2020.
Yes. So I guess the matter before the commission to vote on then is the ratification of the previous extension of Andrew's contract. So all in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Thank you very much for that affirmative vote to ratify our previous action.
Thanks.
Number 11 on our agenda, number 12 is one that usually we blow right through at the end of our agenda, but this time it's going to actually take a little bit of a more substantive discussion. This is tab 16 in your electronic notebook, and let me explain my thoughts. Our next scheduled meeting is July 9th. What I have put in parentheses is potentially via video conference. I am very sensitive to the idea that I don't want to make anyone travel or expose themselves if they don't feel comfortable doing it. If the governor's order that allows us to meet via video conference continues, we may make use of the video conference process that we're using today. If for some reason that order gets rescinded, we then, I believe, would have to meet in person on July 9th, which is scheduled to be in Austin. I don't necessarily know that it will be at the Capitol. We will have to kind of use our best judgment to determine the safest place to meet, for lack of a better term, where we think that it would minimize anyone's exposure. We'd also have to decide what the protocol would be for our interaction. I don't think by that point, and John's probably a better authority on this than any of us, I don't think social distancing will be lifted by then, and I think everyone will still be recommended to keep 6 feet in distance, which may pose a little bit of a logistics problem, so we'll have to look into that. But we will definitely need to meet one way or another on July 9th. So we will keep everybody up to date on that. If anyone has any concerns, obviously you're more than welcome to discuss them now, or we can discuss them later on as well. But I think a lot of this, and again, Dave, tell us if we're wrong about this. A lot of this will depend on guidance from the governor's office as to what is authorized in the way of meetings under the Open Meetings Act moving forward.
That is correct. The allowance for the suspension of certain open meeting provisions is currently linked to the declaration of the state of disaster. So unless the state of disaster is rescinded or the open meeting suspension provisions are rescinded, we can operate in this fashion, subject, of course, to notification from the governor's office.
That being said, we have on the future meetings sheet in your packet, there's also a tentative meeting on August 27th. Peter brought this up before, and I wasn't thinking correctly, but he was absolutely right. What we have done in years past is we always have one last meeting before the end of the fiscal year tentatively scheduled in the event that we don't get our budget approved or that there's some sort of exigent need to meet before the end of the fiscal year. And that's also the end of the disposal year. So we always keep that meeting on the books, but it is often canceled because if we get everything done in July and there's no need to have anything approved before we start our new fiscal year, then we tend to cancel that meeting. But I wanted to make sure everybody knew about it, and that is August 27th. And again, it's listed for Austin, and it's not, and again, depending on what the state of the world is at that point and where we want to meet within Austin, that will be up to whatever the current state of the world is at that point. I suppose it could also be done via remote means if the governor's orders extend to that date. The last issue on meetings is our Vermont meeting, which we generally tend to do in either September or October. Obviously, it's always one of the highlights of our year, but this year it obviously takes a little bit of a different tenor because of the situation in the world. And I guess the question is, do we believe that having the late September, early October meeting in Vermont is a real possibility? And does anyone have any concerns with the idea of, obviously there'd be several of us flying at that point, which I understand Vermont commissioners always come to us, but in the instance where we go to Vermont, there's a lot more bodies that are getting into a flight. And so the question is, what are the opinions of the commissioners about the Vermont meeting that usually happens in September and October? Do we need to move it? Do we need to not go to Vermont this year? Or is there any common thoughts on how we do that? So I'll open it up for comments on that.
Maybe I should just add, Brendan, Vermont's current posture is that the governor has told visitors, please not to plan on coming. I think that at this point it's either end of May or mid-June. And of course, that's subject to extension depending on how things are going. The actual experience with the virus in Vermont has fortunately been pretty small, but it's a hard time to make plans for 4 or 5 months out. From our standpoint, I should talk with Dick as to just when we'd really need a decision. I don't think we absolutely need one yet. And there's really just no way of knowing whether by, I guess, July, August, whatever the planning horizon needs to be, it will be clear that Vermont's either open for visitors or whether the current moratorium is continued.
And that may be a good question for Andrew, actually. How far in advance have we generally planned for the meeting to make reservations and hotel blocks?
Yeah, the hotel block is usually the limiting factor because hotels, especially around Montpelier, Burlington, and in South Vermont, tend to fill up around leaf season, which is when we are typically there. So usually if you can make the hotel block reservation by about mid-June, you can do okay. Now, I don't know what those hotel blocks look like now in light of everything that's happening with COVID-19, but we usually like to have all of our hotel block reservations made by mid-June at the latest.
My guess is that the constraints are much less this year. Hotels are permitted to take reservations starting June 15th. But I'm betting that they're not booked nearly as solidly as they have been every other year we've done this.
And John Sullivan, let me ask you, based on your intimate involvement with this issue, how dangerous or how concerned are you about going to Vermont in late September or early October?
I think if you put it in those terms, I have less of a health and safety concern. The prediction, for what it's worth, is that things will begin to settle down as we enter the summer months, and it's likely that late summer or early fall is probably okay. Later in the fall, they have more concern about a second wave. So if we're going to go to Vermont, I think we need to plan on doing it no later than early October, preferably maybe late September.
Let me ask this: is there anyone on the commission who simply would not feel comfortable going to Vermont in late September, early October? Obviously, with the understanding that if something changes in predictions or if there's an outbreak or something like that, we would obviously change our minds quickly if it became unsafe to travel. But as it currently stands, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that if there is a concern among members that about traveling to Vermont, that will obviously influence our decision on whether or not we go. Any other? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
I think it's just too soon to even comment one way or another.
I think I agree with you on that. I think until we see how the next few weeks, maybe month, unfolds, it will be it could go either way. And so I think you're right. And based on what Andrew said and what Peter have said, the mid-June timeframe may be the time to plan, because we know more then, and then we're also getting things blocked in a way that we ensure that it will be something we can get done. Because I'm sure people, when travel is allowed again, there'll be some people who simply don't travel even still, and so maybe the demand this year will be a little bit less than it has been in the past, and that'll ease our concern about the timing of getting everything booked. So,
well, there's another unique circumstance to consider with this. Even if some people are willing to travel, we have to have a quorum really to justify right. So we can make plans, which may seem great at the time and everybody's on board, but just be ready to change those plans should something that we hope doesn't happen. If the virus makes a comeback.
And the other interesting issue that is a complete anomaly this year is the low-level forum meeting, which I believe is in October, is in San Antonio as well. Oh. So that's the other option to plan a meeting around as well, is if, since the low-level forum is going to be in one of our 2 member states, there's been some discussion that maybe we should try to coordinate one of our meetings down there at the same time, so some of us could attend the low-level forum. We would have to be cognizant of Open Meetings Act issues and having a walking quorum. But that's the other thing to consider is, do we think that this year we should probably have that meeting in San Antonio in connection with the low-level forum and either go to Vermont later or skip it for a year? So that's all just things I think to keep in the back of your mind. If you have any individual thoughts, let me know. I do agree, though, ultimately that it's probably too early to make a definitive decision on this, because there's just too much that remains to be seen, and too much can change in the next even month to really commit to anything. But once we get a little more information, I will try to let everyone know if we think the trip to Vermont is doable, and I'll work with Peter and Dick and Deborah to coordinate that if we think it's a real option and what the options are. I know that we have discussed various venues, but some of that may be dictated by how easy it is to travel as well. So I don't even know that we want to pick necessarily a site yet, and we'll just wait until mid-June and make all those decisions when we have more information. Any other questions about future meetings?
Yeah, I just got one about our committee, maybe when they're going to talk about this
NRC
stuff.
Dick's
That's
not
me,
on,
John,
so I guess it's up to you and John. Like I said, my hope is that at our next meeting on July 9th, that we have at least a draft from you guys so we can then comment and potentially revise it and then get it approved so we can get it to the NRC by the deadline of July 20th. So I mean, however you guys want to accomplish that in between now and July 9th, I'll leave to you guys.
So Judge, I'll reach out to you and Dick and try to set up a time when we can do one of these conference calls and, begin formulating our thoughts.
Okay.
Any other questions about future meetings? Well, with that, then we are complete with our agenda, and I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Once again, thank you all for putting up with the technological issues we've had. And again, thank you very much, Andrew, for coordinating all this. I appreciate everybody's patience with it. And I'm sure we will be in communication in the very near future. Thank you all very much.